Good afternoon. This is Rabbi Golomb speaking to you from Sheffield, and a privilege to be part of this US TV Lunch and Learn. We are in the Parasha of Vayishlach, which is the 8th in the series in the beginning of the book of Genesis. And the story picks up with Jacob being on his way back from approximately somewhere around Iraq, where he had been living for the past 22 years. And he's returning home to the land of Israel. And he's done so by divine command. And he is a little bit worried because his brother Esau has already sworn to kill him. He was upset with him because of the theft of the blessings. And he doesn't know what kind of reception he's going to get. So he prepares himself in three ways. Now, although God had promised him he'd be safe, he'd be okay, he was always worried that maybe he did something which had lost his blessing and divine protection. So he prepared himself in three ways. He prepared himself with he got together a large gift of the currency of the day, which were flocks of animals. And he armed the people that he had with weapons just in case. And he said his prayers and asked the Almighty for help. Rabbis for generations afterwards, whenever they had to deal with the prevailing authorities in the host country which they were living at the time, would read this Parasha to see what things they could learn from it in order to know how to deal with sometimes an aggressive or hostile superior authority. So he sends angels, Jacob. He sends angels back to his brother Esau, and he says to him, I've been living with Lavan, our uncle, our mother's brother, and I've been delayed till now, and now I'm coming back home, and he's trying to smooth the path. The angels come back, and they say to him, well, Esau is coming towards you. He's heard you're on the way back, and he's got 400 men with him. It doesn't look very good at the moment. It's not happy times. Now, the interesting thing is the wording that he uses when he sends these angels. He says to the angels, go to tell Esau, my brother, Im Lavan Garti, with Lavan I have sojourned. I have been staying there. I've been a stranger, like the word ger can mean a stranger. But at the same time, the word Garati has a numerical value to it. You twist the letters around, you get the word Taryag, which is a common way of pronouncing Tofresh Yud Gimel, which adds up to 613, meaning the spiritual form of the 630 mitzvahs as they were before the Torah had been given. And Jacob is saying, I have done all of those. This is an interesting comment to make. Why would he tell that to Esau? And why does he say 630 mitzvahs and use the word garati, which suggests strange, being distant? Is that how you view these things? And one of the explanations given on this is something which is meaningful in life. We have a physical need and we have a spiritual need. As human beings, we need to be able to eat, drink, and sleep and have creature comforts. Those are our physical needs. And then there are spiritual needs. As a Jew, one needs to fulfill Jewish mitzvahs. One needs to be, I often say this, what's the point of being Jewish? To do Jewish things. To be a good person, you don't have to be Jewish. Suggesting a good person, being a good Jew is to be a good person, to pay your taxes and to help old ladies cross the street or something like that. That suggests that if you're not Jewish, you can't do any of that, and you're not going to fulfill it adequately. This is not the case. There are plenty of other nations of the world, non-Jewish people, who are very good people. We don't hold copyright on goodness. So what's the purpose of being Jewish is to do Jewish things. And for this, the Almighty gave us a spiritual side to our soul, a nefesh elikis, a godly spark, which is different to the other nations of the world. It enables you to fulfill mitzvahs. Now the question is, what level of priority do I give those mitzvahs? Sometimes my physical needs take a priority, like right now, when we are dodging this pandemic, we have to look after our physical health, and we have to steer clear of anything which is a danger to life. And if that means compromising mitzvahs here and there, well, then that's what has to be, because it is a commandment from the Almighty that mitzvahs are put aside whenever there's danger to health. All the mitzvahs, bar three very extreme ones, are suspended if you need to do something in order to save life. So this doesn't puzzle me. There is an ancient discussion between Nachmanides and Maimonides whether one is allowed to sacrifice oneself for mitzvahs not of the big three. So if I'm forced to eat something that's not kosher by a strong-armed Nazi, God forbid, do I have to do this? Am I allowed to say I'm not going to eat that non-kosher food, even though it's not one of the big three dreaded averos of sins? So Nachmanides says, yes, you can do that. If you want to volunteer, that's your choice. Maimonides says you mustn't. You must transgress and don't bring yourself to be hurt or killed, God forbid. So this is the view of whether we take material preferences or spiritual preferences. And this is a struggle, but it's a question. How much do I put my spiritual obligations in front of my physical ones? I'm prepared to spend hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on all the material things I need to make sure I eat good food and I have nice clothes and I live in a good home. Do I spend the same amount of money when it comes to mitzvahs? I remember years ago I did a bar mitzvah for somebody, and the family were not religious at all, but they did want to have a mitzvah, which is a great credit to them. The father, I said to him, would you want to purchase tefillin for your son? He is bar mitzvah. Putting on the tefillin is the thing that one does when one turns 13. And the father said, well, how much did it cost? I said, well, they were £250 at the time. He said, it's very expensive. It's a lot of money for something that, let me be honest, Rabbi, we're not going to use them. So I pushed the point a bit, but eventually realized I wasn't going to be successful. In the same conversation, I asked the father, and what are you getting your son for his bar mitzvah, for a present? And he says, he's a guitar player, and I'm buying him a £1,500 guitar. I'll leave the rest for listeners and viewers to work out. This is the balance which you try and have. And Jacob is saying to Esau, his brother, he says, Im Lavan Garati. I've been living with Lavan, but the Lavan bit is Garati. That's just a sojourn. That's a strange, that's not what's important to me. What is important to me is what lies behind it is the Tariq Mitzvah Shamarti. I made sure that I didn't neglect my connection with the Almighty and fulfill those spiritual commandments which He has asked me to do. Further on in the same Sedra, it says that Vayiven loy bayis umelnehu also sukkos. That Jacob, when he returned back to Israel, he built for himself a house, and for his possessions he made sukkot. What are they? Huts? Something temporary. For himself, for the real me, I have a house. But for my possessions, a sukkah will do, something temporary. That's not what's important in life. As we all know, the things we have in this world we cannot take with us. What do we take with us? We take with us all the goodness and the spiritual value of the things, which includes helping others and all the kind deeds that you do, but also the spiritual mitzvahs which I need to fulfill in this world. The moment when life finishes, all that stops. If I walk through a cemetery, I must conceal my tzitzis, because it's not nice to have them dangling in front of those people who are sheikhni offer that dwell in the earth. Why? Because they can no longer fulfill these mitzvahs. B'mesim chavshi, says the Talmud, on the verse in the Psalms. The dead are free. When a person passes away, he's no longer obliged to fulfill mitzvahs. But that's also a benefit. It's also a tremendous opportunity. While I'm here, I can do spiritual things. I can't do that as a soul in the next world, only here. So this is why I put this as a priority, and I make sure that I am the Tariq Mitzvahs is what is significant to me. The other material things are to be considered as strangers. The interesting thing is he finds it necessary, Jacob, to tell this to his brother Esau. Now, what was his initial reaction? Is the angels come back and they say, Banu el achicha el Esau. We arrived at your brother, we returned to Esau. There's a split in the sentence, which Rashi notices, all the commentaries notice it. El achicha el Esau, the repetition of the word to your brother, to Esau, as if separating those two separate concepts. And the understanding is, as far as you're concerned, he's your brother. As far as he's concerned, he's still Esau. He's still mad at you. So you may have benevolent feelings towards him, but he doesn't reflect those same emotions. So why would Jacob be keen to tell him that he has fulfilled all his mitzvahs? And one of the explanations given to them is that Jacob is putting forward where he is, what station he is at in his service to the Almighty. He says, I am there. You may not be there, but I feel it necessary today that I am there because I have to do my bit. The fact that you're not necessarily with me on that, that's not my problem. I have to look after and be responsible for my own religious obligations. I had a Zoom last night with some students, and one of them asked me about stewardship and what we're doing to look after the planet, and maybe we've gone too far and the damage has gone past the point of no return. And it was a discussion. And my answer to her was that, listen, we have to do our bit. When you are recycling something, or you're making sure that you turn off lights, or don't waste water, whatever it is that you're doing your bit. The fact that there are millions of people out there that are not doing their bit, okay, that's not your concern at the moment. You have to look after your bit. And let the Almighty run the world, because it's not good to take on global responsibilities. The only one who really can do that is the Almighty, blessed be He. But we still have to do our bit. Another point. He says to Esau, Vayhi li sheir v'chamoy. He says, I have a sheir v'chamoy. What's the significance of that? Well, he's telling me I've got lots of possessions, but the emphasis on the singular tells us something interesting. In fact, you know what they say? They say that the chamoy, this donkey, is an interesting donkey that he has. The chamoy is the same chamoy, says Pirkei de Rebbe Elazar, one of the very early Midrashic commentaries, that this chamoy, this donkey, is the same chamoy that Abraham used when he took his son to be, so to speak, offered up on the Akedah, but never made it, because God said at the very last moment, stay thy hand. But he put on it the wood and the knife so that he could walk, and the donkey carried the materials. This is the same donkey that is mentioned with Moses when he returns from where he was living with his wife Zipporah in the home, or close to his father-in-law Jethro, and he gets the divine commandment that he has to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And it says that he took this chamoy. There's a mention of a chamoy there. Each of these chamoys are used in a different way. Each of these donkeys. With Abraham, it says he put his materials on them. So the chamoy was simply the donkey was carrying his possessions necessary. With Moses, it says that his wife and his children rode on that donkey. With Jacob, it says, Vayhi li chamoy, I have that chamoy. The chamoy is already mine. And you know what the commentary said? This is a reference to the Messiah, Mashiach, who will be coming on Ivarechev ala chamoy. He'll be riding on a donkey. Now notice the progression. Firstly, you put your items on it. Secondly, you put your family on it. Thirdly, you're on it. And this is the message that as we get closer, this is a continuation that what started with Abraham, when he began to publicize monotheism, that he called in the name of the Almighty, the Master of the universe. And the Talmud says, don't read it as he called, but read it, he's made others call. The fact that for the first time, a human being said, it's not good enough that I can keep my relationship with the Almighty. I'm going to have to spread it and teach others there is a God in the world, and he does care. And that started in the days of Abraham, and it reaches its culmination, its end with the coming of Mashiach. So that's one thing to do with the chamoy that Yaakov mentions. He was ready. As far as he's concerned, if Mashiach comes now, he's happy. He's done everything he needs to do. He thought Esau was on the same level, but it turned out that he wasn't. Going on from that, a little bit later, after the meeting, and surprisingly, Esau does receive him with love. Initially, he was angry when he saw him. His feelings of mercy were aroused, and they hugged each other. and he offered to look after him. He said, "Can I send men with you? Is there anything you need?" He said, "No." Jacob said, "I've got everything I need." And then, as they were traveling, he went over this river called Yabok, and he was moving things one side of the river to the other. And then he left behind Pachim Ketanim, says Rashi, left behind these small vessels. And he went back to retrieve them. And at that point, he meets up with an angel. This angel is not a good angel. It's a warring angel. He's a warrior, and he's representing Esau. And the two of them have a fight, whatever that means. And in the end, he dislocated his leg in some way, and so he was limping the next morning. But eventually, Jacob prevails. And that's how he gets the name Yisrael, which means that you have sought to come higher. That you have fought with God, meaning the angel, and with people, and you have prevailed. So Yisrael is to suggest this ability to try and get above, get beyond, to overcome our challenges. The interesting thing is that the end of the verse, Vatuchal, that you have prevailed, is not what we're called. We're not called the B'nai Tuchal, we're called B'nai Yisrael, the struggle. Not necessarily the fact that we always make it at the end and we survive. Sometimes we struggle and we don't always. We slip, things fall down. That doesn't matter. As long as you struggle, that too counts as something. That's how it begins. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Sometimes we overcome the demons within and sometimes they overcome me. And this, I was once taught by a teacher, somebody who worked in a yeshiva, maybe 30 years ago. I saw it was in the Manchester yeshiva. His name is Rabbi Yonason. And he told me the following, which is an idea which I like to bring together with this. He told me about the story of a Pinchas ben Yair, one of the Talmudic giants, who is so holy that you are not allowed to actually stop and pray at his graveside in Tzfat, in the north of Israel. And it's built like a sort of a roundabout, and you can walk around it, but don't ever stop there. Because if you stop and pray, if you're not on the level, if you're not holy enough, it can do you some harm. This Pinchas ben Yair is once on a mission. So says a Talmud in Chulin, page 7. It says he was on a mission to try and redeem captives. A very great mitzvah. Somebody's in jail and needs money to be redeemed. You do your best to help them out. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. So the Pinchas ben Yair is on this mission, and he comes to this river. And the river is too difficult for him to cross. So he invokes his miraculous powers, and he says to the river, "Split, do me a Red Sea, please, because I need to get to the other side." And the river argues back and says, "Why should I split for you? And when I'm doing my job as flowing as a river, I'm definitely fulfilling God's will. You're going on a mission to try and rescue somebody. You might be successful, you might not. So I'm for certainly doing the right thing. You might end up doing the right thing. So why should I give way to you?" So Pinchas ben Yair replies to the river. He says, "Put it like this. Either you part your waves, or I will decree that you become a dry bed and not have anything. No, you will cease to be a river altogether." Well, when you are a Pinchas ben Yair and the river is faced with a threat like that, you give in. So the waters split. Says the rabbi that I referred to earlier on, he says, this is quite a common question, mentioned other places as well, but I heard it from him, so that's why I mentioned his name. Says the rabbi, wasn't the river right in this sort of metaphysical argument? The river is definitely fulfilling God's will, and Pinchas ben Yair might be fulfilling God's will. He's on a mission to do that. He's trying, but who knows if he'll be successful. So why should he give way? Why should the river give way to the rabbi? Is the answer, he's trying. He's on a mission. He's in a path. If you're not successful straight away, maybe it will take time. It is not your duty. It's not your duty to desist from it. You still have to try. You may not necessarily fulfill it. You won't be goymer. This used to be the stationery from Rabbi Lord Sachs. He had it printed on his personal stationery. It's not your duty to complete the task, but you can't give it up altogether. So start. If we do something good, a little bit more, maybe in a few years' time, I'll get to doing it completely. Or like some people I've come across in the past to say, Rabbi, I cannot keep Shabbat. It's too much for me. I have a business to run. I just can't shut on a Saturday altogether. I say, okay, what about Friday night? I say, what about Friday night? Well, can you keep some of Shabbos? Yes. About 30 years ago, I went to visit somebody in Leeds who owned a greetings card factory, millions of them. He was a very wealthy fellow. And he told me that he has to run the business, and he goes into the business on Saturday, and that's the end of it. We put on tefillin and developed a friendship. And then at one point, he says to me, I'll tell you, he says, Rabbi, I may not keep Shabbat. He says, but I don't do my washing. He's single. He was single at the time. So I don't do my washing on the Shabbat. I don't actually have to have the washing machine going around on Shabbat. I can do it on Sunday. I have to go into work, but I don't have to. Well, I would, in theory, argue he doesn't have to go to work anyhow. But at his stage in life, he was keeping something. He was on the path. He was in the direction. And so the same thing is Israel. Try, make a bit of an effort. Just advance an inch. If you can't do it all, do some. Keeping Shabbat for an hour is keeping Shabbat for an hour. It's not 25 hours, but it is an hour. It's worth something. And always never give up hope on people. As you know, when the Jews committed the sin of the golden calf, where was Moses at the time? It was at the top of Mount Sinai. They made a mistake. So you should never be too on time, you know. You know why they built the golden calf? Because a bunch of people standing around the bottom of the mountain. Moses should have been here by now. Not here. Let's build a golden calf. So being late on occasions can have a virtue. So while Moses was at the top of the mountain, what was he doing? He was learning Torah from the Almighty. Almighty is well aware of what was going on with the Jewish people down below. In fact, when he finished learning at the end of the 40 days, he says to Moses, raid, lech raid, go down. Let me go down. Say raid in Hebrew, sufficient say. What's lech raid? It says lech means go from here, and raid, you're going to go down from your greatness. The only reason you're great, Moses, is because you're the leader of the Jewish people. They're what give you the greatness. And unfortunately, they've sinned because they made for themselves a golden calf. Now, winding the clock backwards, God would have been aware of this for almost a day beforehand, or at least however many hours it was, the 8th into the 40th day. And so God continues teaching Moses, knowing full well that the Jewish people are sinning at this very moment, but he's still teaching Moses. And the whole purpose of teaching Moses is that he will convey this message to the Jewish people. So God didn't give up on us then. You still teach, you still have a go, you still attempt, even if you're not all successful. This is a message of Kisarisa, one of the messages of Kisarisa, because you're trying. And even if you don't get there, you are still good, doing the will of God by trying. And finally, what did Jacob go back over the river for? He went to pick up the Pachim Ketanim, these small vessels. He's a multimillionaire, Jacob. He has huge herds. He's got a wife and kids. He doesn't need servants. The money that he made from the breeding, he sold and bought other items. He goes back for a few jars. What would today's generation say? Leave them, we'll buy new ones. Throw away society. So why does Jacob go back? And he goes back because because the Almighty cares about your material possessions. Each one, in addition to having a physical persona, also has a spiritual dimension. And that spiritual dimension is connected in some way to your soul. The particular watch that you chose, if you ask to justify why you chose that watch, why you drive this car, you'll be able to find some reasons, but usually those reasons are not sufficient because there's something about that which you like. If you have a particular hobby that you collect things, and I ask you why, I don't know, I just like it. It's the particular thing that interests you. But from a spiritual dimension, says the Baal Shem Tov, that all of these things are somehow embedded in your soul, and they're a part of your job to engage with this world and elevate the sparks of divinity that are to be found in those things that you like. And therefore, explains the Baal Shem Tov as follows. On occasions, you'll lose something. On occasions, it will break. Why? Because since everything in God's world has a purpose, and it may seem random, but it isn't, everything down to the tiniest atom, to the leaves that flutter down the trees or have fluttered that are clogging our roads here in Sheffield. And I just saw them outside cleaning the roads finally. Every leaf has its divine path, where it should land, why it should land in a particular area. I don't know why, but I only have a finite mind. I can't deal with billions of leaves just in Sheffield. We have more, by the way, Sheffield has more trees per capita than any other city in the UK. I'm not sure about the UK, but at least in England. So in this instance, Jacob is after his vessels because they're relevant to him. When a person's finished using or elevating that vessels by using it in some way towards divine purpose or towards some purpose which fits into your Weltanschauung, the things that you're doing in life generally, you need a car because you need to get to work, and that's a mitzvah as well. Then that will, when you finish elevating it, then it will mysteriously come to an end. It could be that your divine sparks have found their way to something higher, but somebody else has also some connection to it. So you will lose it, and somebody else will find it. Even the food that you eat, and I ask you to define why you have a particular liking for certain foods. I don't know, I just like them. Some people like certain things. As one person likes one food, the other one can't stand it. Like for Snoggy, Galaretta. If you ever want to spark off a conversation about food, and discuss Galaretta, for those who know what I'm talking about, or for Snoggy, or Pachar, the various names. There are people who say, I can't stand it, it makes me want to throw up. But others say, I love it. Why do you like food? Because your soul senses that there is a divine spark in this food which is relevant to you, and that's why you want it. And why do you think all this weight? Well, it's because I'm after the divine sparks. I'm not after the food. So when you like certain things, that's because there is some connection. Kol Oichel, what is the verse in Psalm 107? Escapes my they are hungry and they are thirsty. Their soul is weary. Soul is weary? Soul's never weary. It's the body that's weary when you're thirsty or when you're hungry. Says the Baal Shem Tov, no, it's the soul that is weary, because the soul needs for you to eat and drink in order to nourish the spiritual side of the soul, which comes from the spiritual side of the food that you need. And that is why Jacob goes back to retrieve his pachim ketanim, his little vessels, because if those are relevant to me, then that is what I need to take. And this is not just a view with materials, tiny objects. It's a view of time and space as well. Sometimes in the days before GPS, you get lost. If you're like me, you're alpha male, you don't like to be lost. You like to be in control and know where you're going. So I resisted GPS for a long time. I prefer to use my own maps. Why would you get lost? You get frustrated. You get frustrated, you ask somebody directions, they give you directions, and it ends up to be the wrong thing, or you forget the directions. Jackie Mason has a whole skit on this. And so you get frustrated. Why? Because I'm not where I'm supposed to be. In God's world, that's a terminological incongruity. What do you mean you're not where you're supposed to be? If you're not where you're supposed to be, how comes you're there? Nothing happens by mistake. You think you made the mistake, but God wanted you to be there. Okay, so if I'm here in this desolate country lane, nowhere near where I'm supposed to be, what am I supposed to do? So we'll spend a moment, do something Jewish. You are, after all, gifted with the soul that can bring divinity to anything material, as long as you know how to do it. So stop, say the Shema, daven mincha, repeat a word of Torah. Do something that will leave behind a little bit of atmosphere of Jewishness, of holiness, make the world a holier place. And once you do that, that's there forever. I did a Zoom in a Catholic school in Rotherham on Sunday. A number of questions. I was on there with a humanist and a Catholic and a Catholic father. And presenting, we weren't arguing, we were just presenting different points of view to these senior girls and the questions that they had. I was in discussion. We don't believe in eternal damnation, because it was one of the questions that came up. That God, evil is not eternal. If you do 10 bad things today and one good thing, the day's still worth it. Because then 10 bad things will eventually be erased. But the one good thing is eternal. And with that in point, I think I have run out of my time. Hannah, is that the end of it? If so, I bid you all a very good afternoon, a few thoughts, and thank you for listening to me.